Revelation chapter 6 to 10 describe the events in the world during the tribulation period. Chapters 11 to 18 deals with the people, groups, and nations who will play an important part in the tribulation period. There are two categories among the personalities in the tribulation: God's people and the enemies of God. We looked at the people of God in our previous study. Today, we will look at the enemies of God, who are described in detail in Revelation chapters 13 to 18. We begin by looking at what I call the unholy Trinity. The truth always has its counterfeits. Just as there is the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, there will also be an unholy Trinity. They are introduced to us in Revelation chapter 13. So we look at the most important member of that unholy Trinity, that is the dragon. We have already come across the central figure of the unholy Trinity in chapter 12. He is none other than Satan, the old serpent who tempted Adam to sin in the Garden of Eden. Revelation chapter 12, verses 3 to 4, introduced him in this way. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment it was born. Satan must not be underestimated or trivialized. Today he is portrayed either as a cartoon character or as a monster in horror movies. These are false portrayals of Satan that mislead us as to his true character and intentions. They make us look for Satan in the wrong places, so that we don't see him coming until it is too late. Satan is a power to be reckoned with. He is described with images of power: 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. He is in control of nations and kings. He has access to political, social, and religious powers. Satan also commands a host of demonic beings. Verse 4 tells us that a third of the angels created by God fell together with Satan. They chose to follow him and join in the rebellion against God. Satan's war against God and heaven is recounted in Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 to 9. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to earth, and his angels with him. The satanic host was expelled from heaven and have made the earth their home and their base of operations. So, we live in a dangerous environment. A proxy war is going on. Satan opposes God by striking at God's people. His agenda is simple: to lead the whole world astray. In other words, to turn people away from God and to turn God away from people. His assault against God's people is described by Revelation 12:10 as follows: the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. However, Satan will never prevail against God. Neither will he prevail against God's people. Revelation chapter 12, verse 11 speaks of their victory. And they triumphed over him, that is the dragon, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Victory over Satan lies in not being deceived by him. Satan's goal is to drag people down to hell together with him. He fabricates untruth, doubts, false gospels, false saviors to turn people away from God. People overcome Satan by faith, first by believing in Christ, and then by persevering in Christ. They persevere by their unfailing witness to the truth of the gospel that they had believed in. Thus the world is warned. Satan is a man on a mission. Revelation chapter 12 verse 12 to 13 says, "Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows his time is short." When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. During the last days, Satan tries to snuff out Israel because the believers of Israel will expose his lies and they will bring the true message of God, the gospel, to the world. How will Satan try to achieve this? This is where the second person of the unholy Trinity comes in, the beast. Satan is the power behind the world ruler we know as the Antichrist, but in the book of Revelation, he is known as the beast. We read of him in Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 to 2. "And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but it had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and authority." The word sea is a common expression in Old Testament prophecies to refer to the Gentile nations. The word earth usually refers to Israel. Thus, the beast will be a Gentile ruler. The 10 horns are symbols of earthly power and tell us that the beast will be a ruler of 10 nations. The beast will be a potent earthly power. His strength is compared to some of the most lethal killers in the animal kingdom. The blasphemous names carried on his head tells us that the values, philosophy, and morals of the beast are contrary to God and are an affront to God. The society he will rule over idolizes immorality like homosexualism, abortion, pluralism, atheism, agnosticism, and all those ideas that offend God. The success of the beast will be guaranteed by Satan's power. We also learn that part of the beast's success will be his popularity. The reason for the support that he will enjoy is explained in Revelation chapter 13, verse 3 to 4. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. And they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" This will be a satanic attempt to duplicate the resurrection of Christ. There appears to be an assassination attempt. The beast will be wounded, but he will recover from what should be a fatal wound. He will emerge stronger than before. The world will be astounded and will attribute divinity to his miraculous recovery. They will treat him like a god. Here will be their competitor to Christ, someone who will come back from the dead. However, they will know who is behind him. Not God, not Christ, but Satan himself. Just as Christ demonstrated his divinity by miracles, the beast will seek to copy Christ by being able to perform miracles. Paul said in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9, the coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with how Satan works. He will use all sorts of displays of power through signs and wonders that serve the lie. The world will be enchanted and enamored by the beast. What's more, they will appreciate Satan for being the power behind the beast. The world will worship both the beast and Satan. That is why the beast will be so presumptuous as to set up an idol of himself in the temple of Jerusalem. Paul spoke of this very thing in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. The agenda of the beast will explain why he is commonly known as the Antichrist. Revelation chapter 13, verse 5 to 7 tells us, the beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise his authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. The beast will be both demonic and deranged. He hates God. He hates God's people. He hates the truth, the scriptures, and the gospel. He will destroy those who proclaim the truth to a dying world. We come to the third member of the unholy trinity, the false prophet. There will be another person also called the beast. His role will be to support the first beast and to act on behalf of the beast. We read about him in Revelation chapter 13, verse 11 to 13. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. This beast will come from the earth. I had pointed out earlier that the earth is a symbol for Israel. This means that the second beast will be a Jew. While the true Israel will flee into the wilderness to escape the beast, there will be Jews who will welcome the rule of the beast. One such person will offer himself in employment to the beast. He will be no ordinary person. He will be known as a prophet because of his supernatural abilities. He will be like a modern-day Elijah, causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of the people. However, he will serve the beast, not himself. He will be the power behind the throne, the brains of the beast, his public relations officer, and also his personal delegate, exercising power in the absence of the beast. The false prophet's main task will be to organize and promote the cult worship of the beast. He too will be energized by the devil. He will use his supernatural powers derived from Satan to perform tricks that will deceive people into believing that the beast is a god. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 14 to 15, we learn, because of the signs he was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast, who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refuse to worship the image to be killed. In this way, he will popularize the cult of the beast to the point of forcing people to worship the beast or be killed. There will be no more religious freedom. The false prophet will also use the authority of the beast to implement a worldwide economic system controlled by the beast. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 16 to 18, we read of his nefarious plot. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. Today, trade, commerce, and finance can be done digitally. The false prophet will take it a step further by organizing it under one system, controlled by one person. With this, the beast will control the world. Together, this unholy trinity will wage war against God and God's people. They will enjoy success during the duration of the tribulation. However, just as the tribulation period will end, their time as false gods and prophets will also come to an end. We must be careful of counterfeits in our midst. False teachers can come into our midst and be very convincing. Remember what they did to the 7 churches? The beast and the false prophet will deceive nearly the whole world. Those whom they can't deceive, they will kill. Our church and our people are just as exposed as the people in the tribulation. That is why we must be vigilant and be careful of those professing to have discovered a new way, a new approach, a new teaching. Never forget what Christ said in Revelation chapter 3, verse 10. I'm coming soon. Hold on. Hold on to what you have, so that no one will take your crown. The defeat and judgment of these evil entities will be covered in the next lecture. God will always triumph over evil. For a moment, we must leave these terrifying characters and look at the last major personality in the tribulation period. We now look at the partner of the unholy trinity, Babylon. When we look at how the beast will control the politics and the economy of the world, we wonder, where is the morality in human society that should have stood up to this unholy tyranny? Yes, where indeed? The morality that undergirds politics, governments, economics, and social development has always been provided by religion. Evil will thrive during the tribulation period because the guardian of morality will become corrupt. Revelation chapter 17, verse 1 to 2 tells us, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. With her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated by the wine of her adulteries. The name written on her forehead was a mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. Who is this Babylon? This Babylon will not be an actual city or a nation or a king that will be limited to one specific geographical location. Verse 2 says that this Babylon sits by many waters. This cryptic description of Babylon was later explained by the angel in Revelation chapter 17 verse 5. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. This means that this Babylon will have a worldwide community drawn from different nations and races. Such a following brings many benefits like wealth and influence. As a result, Babylon will be courted by kings and nations, obviously because of the influence that she wields. In turn, this Babylon will enjoy the possibility of accessing secular power in addition to the moral influence that she already has. This will be a marriage of convenience, but God calls this adultery. Babylon will desert and betray her true Lord in exchange for another. The historical Babylon is long dead and gone. During her heyday, Babylon was a source of ideas that corrupted the truth about God. Babylon created various versions of the origin of the world and the flood. Babylon created gods that mirrored God and Christ and distorted the truth of the only God. Babylon created alternative religions and provided the foundations for the religions of the ancient world, like that of the Sumerians, the Assyrians, Neo-Babylonians, Chaldeans, Persians, Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans. In short, Babylon is anti-God and anti-Christ. Babylon is not a political or economic entity. Instead, she will be an entity who will provide moral, spiritual, and religious guidance to the kings of the earth. Babylon will be none other than a state church. But in reality, she will be a false church, peddling corrupt doctrines and using her influence over kings to enrich herself. The false church will be a master of compromise. She will say what kings want to hear. She will justify the lust and the wrongs of kings and reap the benefits to herself. Instead of leading kings in the truth, she will feed them with compromises and corrupt ideas. Revelation reserves the most shameful names for Babylon. She is called a prostitute, one who sells herself for a price, and an abomination, an affront to God and God's people. Her critics will be the true believers. They will expose the truth about her. They will teach the truth that Babylon wants to bury. Eventually, they will pay the price for this. Babylon will persecute believers so much that she will be drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. More Christians have been killed throughout history by the church than by other religions or by governments. Events like the Crusades and the Inquisitions were the killing fields for Christians. The execution of heretics and witches were nothing more than reprisals against those who reject the teachings of the church. The later crusades were wars against communities in Europe who tried to go back to the Bible. True believers had to flee the church in Europe by migrating to new lands like the Americas so that they can follow the Bible. In the tribulation, Babylon will seek to extend her influence by an unholy partnership. Revelation chapter 17 verse 3 says, "Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns." This is the same beast first revealed in Revelation chapter 13 verse 1. The beast will have political, economic, and military power. He will enter into an alliance with Babylon, the false church, to acquire religious power over the people of the world. Christians are always tempted by the alliance with earthly power. If we could influence governments, we could end persecution. We could build more churches, have more cemeteries. A friendly government could even pave the way for the preaching of the gospel. Government could give God a hand. Therefore, we are told Christians should join in the venture to win political power. But at what cost? Babylon, the prostitute, will sacrifice principles, morality, and truth. Compromise will become a way of life, all in the quest to access power and influence. Babylon will eventually pay for her sins. The partnership she puts her trust in will be the cause of her demise. Revelation chapter 17 verse 16 says, "The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire." After using the false church to gain power, the beast will turn on her. Presumably, the beast will use secular laws to strip the false church of its properties, outlaw her activities, arrest her officials, and neutralize the influence of Babylon. The whole of chapter 18 of Revelation is devoted to celebrating the fall of Babylon. Does God gloat? No. The focus of human history during the tribulation is God's plan for his people. Babylon will be a counterfeit that will unfortunately lead many people astray. Heaven celebrates not out of spite for its enemies, but out of joy for the vindication of God's plan and God's people. So, Revelation 18 verse 1 to 3 and verse 10 warns of the fall of Babylon. "After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, 'Fallen! Fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, Woe! Woe to you, great city, you mighty city of Babylon! In 1 hour, your doom has come.' There will be no redemption for Babylon. Yet, God will give the opportunity for misguided souls to flee Babylon before the inevitable happens. Revelation chapter 18 verse 4 and 5 says, "Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. This verse is another clue that shows that Babylon will be a false church. She will house believers who will be misled into thinking that she is the true church. Another clue is found in Revelation chapter 17, verse 9. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. Many interpreters have identified the 7 hills as Rome. The European community was founded on the Treaty of Rome, 1957. This is the home of Babylon. Nothing further needs to be said. The final outcome of Babylon is expressed in Revelation chapter 18, verse 21 as follows. Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea and said, with such violence the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. So let's conclude. We tend to regard the tribulation period as a time of chaos, confusion, and crisis. It has the appearance of the world going out of control. However, I hope that today you could see that God is firmly in control of the history and the future of the world. Sin and rebellion, which God has allowed to exist for so long, will finally be reined in. Sinners, and especially those who lead others to sin, will be judged. Their hold over humanity will one day be broken. We often say that we must learn from the past and not repeat the mistakes of the past. The book of Revelation tells us that we must learn from the mistakes of the future as well.